Okay, we'll call to order the Water Demand Committee for February 6, 2025, and at 1:35. Roll call, please.
Director Oglesby,
Here.
Director Paul,
Here.
Chair Edwards.
Here.
Let the record reflect that Director Paul is attending as the alternate today.
Thank you. Next item. Any additions or corrections to the agenda?
No.
Okay. Do we have any public for public comment? They have 3 minutes.
We have 3 members in attendance. However, I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. What's first section, my item, Mayor? I mean, GM?
It's approval or adoption, rather, of the minutes of December 3rd.
Okay, do we have any questions on those minutes?
I do not.
No, I don't
Okay.
have any. I move approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, second, do we have anyone from the public want to speak on the minutes?
Chair Edwards, I see no raised hands.
No raised hands. Okay, we'll take a vote, please.
Yes. Director Paul,
Yes.
Director Oglesby,
Aye.
Chair Edwards.
Aye.
Minutes are
Next item.
adopted 3-0.
Thank you. Next item, GM.
Next item is adopting the 2025 scheduled meetings for the committee. And it's there's an attachment in the package.
Okay.
Any problem with it? I mean, I looked at it. I don't know of any reason to change it.
Yeah, I think only Sarah would have had any feedback from any of the directors. So
Right. I received none.
yeah.
Okay, we can move to approve.
Oglesby move approval.
I'll second it.
We have a first and a second. Anyone from the public want to speak on the minutes?
On the schedule,
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, we had schedule.
right. I see no raised hands, Chair Edwards.
No raised hands. Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Chair Edwards,
Approval?
Director Paul,
Yes.
Director Oglesby.
Aye.
The meeting schedule is adopted 3-0.
Thank you. Next item will be discussion item, GM.
Yeah, we have 3 discussion items. The first of them is a discussion on non-functional turf requirements. Stephanie Locke will present that. And then I'll have a comment after the presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. You want to cue up the presentation?
Okay, so it's the,
It's the AB 1572.
okay.
All right, so this discussion is on the ban on irrigation of non-functional turf. Go ahead to the next one. And the question is, what is non-functional turf? So non-functional turf is decorative grass that has no recreational function. Examples include grass that's located outside and around businesses and churches. It can also be turf in parking lots and road medians. Essentially, it is just decorative and it serves no purpose as far as the public and access use by the public for recreation. So functional turf, the opposite, is used for recreational and community purposes. It includes things like sports fields, picnic areas, and community spaces, golf courses, playgrounds, and pet exercise areas, cemeteries, and it also includes areas that are irrigated with recycled water. The legislation does not address residential turf. So the state ban on irrigation of non-functional turf has been implemented in stages. Starts in 2027 with properties that are owned by state and local governments and local and regional public agencies. That is followed in 2028 with a requirement to remove this non-functional turf in commercial and industrial properties. And then in 2029, common areas of homeowner associations and common interest developments, such as condo complexes. And then finally in 2031, for areas that are in disadvantaged communities that are owned by local governments, they can wait until 2031 when there should be funding for turf replacement. So the key points of the law, it is a prohibition on non-functional turf irrigation. There are civil penalties for non-compliance, and it aligns with the State Water Board regulations. And in terms of the State Water Board regulations, going back to the drought in the past 10 years, the state implemented prohibitions on non-functional turf irrigation. I believe it was for a period of 3 to 4 years. And during that time, the Water Management District did actually get active with that. We identified properties that had this non-functional turf. We sent letters to these people telling them that they needed to cease irrigating those areas. And so we have maintained that list since then. Okay, next. So there are also reporting requirements, and by 2027, all public water systems have to revise the regulations to include the requirements, and they have to communicate those requirements to their customers before 2027. CalAm and the district have basically identical our conservation and rationing plan, which includes this type of regulation related to water waste. And so we will probably need to amend that regulation to include this ban on non-functional turf. By 2030, commercial properties that have greater than 5,000 square feet have to certify with the state by June 30th of 2030, and then every 3 years through 2039, that their property meets the requirements. And then also the homeowner associations, common interest developments, and community service organizations also need to do that same reporting. So as far as district action goes, as I mentioned, we have identified and we maintain a list of non-functional turf locations, and that probably needs to be updated since it was done, I think it was done probably in 2018. There will need to be an effort to outreach to property owners, although that is, it is CalAm's responsibility to do that outreach, but I think the district would like to coordinate with CalAm on that. The district is looking at developing a program to assist people with non-functional turf to help them to develop landscape plans for the replacement with water efficient landscaping. And then, of course, we have our water waste enforcement actions, which we're always enforcing. So we would be out helping to do that enforcement as well. And that concludes my presentation.
Yeah, and let me weigh in here. So the legislation itself gave enforcement powers to public water systems, cities, counties, or city and counties. obviously San Francisco in that case. They didn't highlight special districts. So we know we can give ourselves certain powers through the ordinance making process. And so it's, excuse me, relatively clear to us that we can probably take on the mantle of notification and enforcement. Due in no small part that we think Cal-Am won't really do a terrific job. It's unpopular, and it's going to take many touches, not just a single touch with a letter to a customer. So we're going to request JEA and Associates to meet with the committees in both the Assembly and the Senate to try to get language slid into an omnibus bill to just amend public water systems, city, county, put in comma or special district, and get enforcement explicitly written in the law to help us kind of avoid a future local challenge to the authority to enforce. When we choose to enforce, you know, I'm pretty convinced we need to say this was not of our making, that this is a state regulation, because it will be unpopular. You may recall at one point I encouraged Mayor Oglesby to, and frankly, the city of Monterey is probably in the same boat, but, you know, pass a simple resolution declaring all of the public space outside of City Hall to be recreational and place for public gatherings, just to have it on record that it fits one of those categories of functional rather than non-functional. But there are still some fairly large swaths. What I found interesting is while it exempted recycled water irrigation, it did not exempt well water irrigation. And so that's either going to require some cleanup in a subsequent piece of legislation or some clarification, because that used to be the thing. You know, you'd pull up and somebody have a sign that says not, or this lawn irrigated by well water, as if that was supposed to, yeah, stuff.
But Dave, this only applies to public water suppliers. So well would not be considered water from a public water supplier.
Right, but that's one of the problems we're going to have, which is, well, why is that guy affected by it and this guy is not?
Right, and we do have some other areas that have extensive non-functional turf that actually I would like to see in some way have that changed. And in particular, Rio Road, there's several condos down on Rio Road that have extensive grass landscapes that are not functional. And so the board will have to have a further discussion on that.
So suffice to say that, you know, they gave a pretty good lead, you know, pretty good head start, 2027. So I think we would work on cleanup for enforcement powers this year, work on communication jointly with Cal-Am probably later this year, early next year. But, you know, there's no enforcement objectives until 2027. So, you know, it gives us a head start, but it's coming. And when Stephanie alluded to the last drought, they attempted to ban all irrigation of grassy medians. And unfortunately, part of what feeds trees their irrigation, you know, trees good, grass bad. That was the whole mantra of the time. But a lot of the irrigation system for the trees was the same irrigation system for the grass. And so they turn it off, you lose the grass, trees start showing stress. A couple of the cities actually did mobile watering with the tank trucks and, you know, went out and tried to give them a little, you know, a little burst of fresh water. So, you know, I think there are some obvious candidates that the district's already identified, but there are probably some surprises that will come across. And as I said earlier, it won't be popular. And so we'll have to address the messaging pretty even-handedly. But you should know about it, and now you do.
Any questions from the committee right now? Mayor, any questions?
No, I think they both laid it out pretty good. Only thing I had, David, that was an excellent suggestion for the city's municipal grasses. And I think if you guys could come up with some simple wording for us, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So we can do, so one thing you could say, they all say the same things, but then if we can get it in our ordinances sooner than later, we're not trying to just beat the enforcement mechanisms.
Yep. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because in 2020 and 2021, when we had those 2 dry years, and the governor kind of lumped in a 3rd year and said, "Oh, we're into drought, we're into drought." The governor's executive order said no irrigation of non-functional turf. So that was the first time you heard this new term, non-functional turf. And I'll be honest with you, Chris Cook and I had to have a conversation about how would we interpret cemeteries, because they provided absolutely no guidance in that executive order. And so we kind of put our heads together and said, all right, we're going to treat cemeteries as similar to recreational space. Obviously, the permanent residents of the cemetery don't care if their grass is green or not. It's there for the people who come to visit and pay their respects and so forth. So we said, from that standpoint, the irrigation's public benefit is more the living than the deceased. But it's kind of interesting to see that then got memorialized in the actual assembly bill that passed. But as I said, we're just getting started, but it's important to know that with each of these, and you're about to hear about another one, these new initiatives by the state, there are impacts, local impacts. So here we are.
Karen, any questions?
No, thank you.
No questions? So Dave, and Stephanie, you said we can put an ordinance in place to cover this. You want to see if the state going to put special districts in. But
Yeah.
I feel that I'm waiting on the state, and I know how the state is. They'll plot along. What could happen if we come up with the ordinance right now and put it in effect, and then when the state comes, that's just showing the state that we're not going to wait on them.
Yeah.
And showing the community, hey, you got to get your house in order, and we got to get ours, so we're going to start now.
Yeah, and I think
do
that
we
is
have a problem with that?
No, and I think that is the plan. This will be part of an amendment to our rules and regulations this year.
And
So,
I recognize Fran is on right now. I won't put her on the spot, but at some point we'll need Fran and Michael to say, yes, you can do this by ordinance, even though it's not highlighted in the actual bill for enforcement.
well, I was going to get to Fran sooner or later, because she know I was going to ask her, how can we get this done? And how soon can we get this done? Because we like to wait around, and I don't like to wait around when I'm hearing things like that. I like to get on top of it. So go ahead, Fran.
Well, I think the first important thing is the timeline that Stephanie laid out in her PowerPoint presentation. And that is, while we're trying to get ahead of the implementation, it's not necessarily changing our ordinance. We've always had the right to stop water waste per se. So I'll start with that. The issue that I hear being discussed is the fact that there may be a question about Monterey Peninsula Water Management District as a special district not having this authority. And so I believe Dave's suggestion that we work through our lobbyists to inform the state assembly and Senate that perhaps this is a modification that needs to be made. In the meantime, Chair Edwards, I know that our general manager has already indicated that we would be coordinating with Cal-Am and probably doing our own outreach, trying to start informing the public, particularly those entities that are going to be impacted, to plan now. I can tell you from a personal point of view, when they were upgrading the landscaping where I live, I noticed that some turf had been installed. And I told our landscaping manager that, that was a waste of money because very soon we would not be allowed to irrigate that. So I think trying to educate people who are going to be impacted with this and starting that earlier, there's nothing that prevents us from doing that. And we can do it through our newsletters, through our website, Cal-Am. Every month they put out a bill, they can put in a notification. They have that capacity. So I think those are the avenues, rather than saying the district is now going to implement an ordinance. I believe that is premature at this time, but we can discuss it later in the year to see if we're getting any traction with the legislature, or if there's some acknowledgement of what the timeline might be when they're going to amend or recognize that we already have the power to do what we want to do. So,
and I think it goes beyond us. I'm pretty sure, and this is some research that I still have to do, but I'm pretty sure Metropolitan Water District of Southern California is not a public water system. Same for Santa Clara Valley Water District, same for Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District. Any of the wholesalers who don't have their 15 or more retail connections, I don't think are public water systems. So by just calling out public water systems for enforcement, you do lose a lot of the large scale water wholesalers that would have a direct interest in controlling water waste. So we have to do a little more of our own research, but I don't think it's just the district who might want to be in an enforcement role that was closed out by the choice of words in the document. But anyway, that, as I said, that's just background until we hear more.
Okay, Director Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I've only looked, taken a quick look at the legislation, so I'm not sure about this, but is there an argument that what we're asking for is a clarification of the legislation rather than a modification as far as the authority of special districts to enforce? I mean, if there is, that might be helpful to frame it that way. What do you think, Fran?
I think that's
Okay,
appropriate.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
and a lot of times you can get a legislative counsel's opinion,
Correct.
which might clarify it. But the easy answer is going to be, boy, they wrote this in two different places in the legislation. The drafters must have had intent, and our point will be, no, the drafters had oversight issues. I mean, it was just an oversight. And the easy fix would be just a quickie amendment. That's why we won't take it to Laird or Addis, because they get a limited number of bills they can schedule for the session. And it's not worth it for them to waste one of their bills. But the committee itself, at some point during the 2-year legislative session, will have a chance to do an omnibus cleanup bill of 3 or 4 or 7 or 20 other things under their committee purview. So that would be the preferred path. And we would obviously inform Laird and Addis that we have this, seeking their support. But yeah, if the committee itself can't do the lifting to get this done, then at that point, we'll make either a decision to give up on clarifying the enforcement language and just continue to move forward under our own ability, or look at something else. But I don't foresee it to be a big problem, although you want it to be specific. I mean, it would have been nice to have had
Yeah.
it clearly written. But yeah, as everyone has already spoken, we've got the power of law in our favor.
Can I add one
Well,
last thing?
In that case, I want to use that power of law.
Yeah.
Are we going to introduce this to the full board this month or next month?
So last staff meeting a week ago, I kind of went through some of my expectations for the current calendar year. And one of them was a cleanup bill for Water Demand Committee. So it'll probably find its way into that unless we don't have enough other items to go with it by May or June.
Okay.
So that's the timeline, is May, June-ish.
All right, because I like to see a timeline on it. And I know y'all like to wait the full year to see if the state going to do anything, but we need to introduce it to the public with a timeline, and that we're going to enforce it. You know, I hear Fran, she want to soft walk this in a way, but I like to put it out there as soon as possible, and that we'll put our enforcement mechanism in place and let somebody, they don't like it, they know where to go. But we need to move on it and get this done.
Yep.
Okay, if no other questions from the committee members, Sarah, could you check the public for any comments?
Yes, Chair Edwards,
On this item?
I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll close this item. What's the next one, GM?
So the next one will be, again, primarily Stephanie. This went down in the document as new drought and conservation reporting standards. It's also kind of broadly known as the Conservation as a Way of Life regulation. And it incorporates a couple of separate regulations enacted by the state in the last year or two, I guess if we look at gallons per capita per day. And it's all centered around water use efficiency or water use efficiency objectives. So the state database now has a WUE kind of flavor for water use efficiency. There's a whole reporting portal that's now being used. And Stephanie, why don't you pick up on those topics here with your PowerPoint?
Thank you. Okay, Sarah, can you next slide, please? Okay, so making conservation a California way of life is the state's regulation on water use efficiency. It is also referred to as the Water Conservation Framework. And as board members, you may come across these two terms from time to time. This will give you just a rough idea of what's involved with this this regulation and how we're involved and how CalAM's involved with it. So the Water Conservation Framework is the regulation that establishes these efficiency goals for each urban retail water supplier in California. And again, it's specific to urban retail water suppliers. And Dave, that's over is it over 3,000 customers? Is that the number?
Yeah, 3,000.
So in our area, CalAM is the only urban retail water supplier. So it, again, applies to those to implement locally appropriate conservation requirements. There are three major components to the framework. There's a unique urban water use objective. As Dave mentioned, they've gone into a lot of different water use objective is kind of the key term, but in this case, we're using the urban water use objective. There are performance measures for commercial, institutional, and industrial uses. And then there's an annual reporting requirement that pulls everything together. So what is the urban water use objective? It is a supplier-specific water budget, and it is made up of the sum of residential indoor water use. So there is an objective for residential indoor water use, residential outdoor water use, commercial, institutional, and industrial water use, those commercial or non-residential landscapes that have dedicated irrigation meters, and then real water losses by the system. So those are all added up to create this objective.
Can I stop you
Yeah.
for a question?
Sure.
Brief. What about water for firefighting?
I believe that would fall into the water loss, or actually it wouldn't be because it's not real water loss. Firefighting is usually estimated if it's not metered. So that would not be considered a real water loss.
Yeah, we'll have to, it's a great question. And there's actually two more bullets that should, well, have been mentioned in, it's been referred to, but it's not a hard, fast number. One is a bonus given back for use of recycled water. And then there's an other category, and this is where a lot of the whining will take place, which is why is our urban area different than everyone else's urban area? We need to make an adjustment down here under this other category. But fire flow, yeah, it didn't jump off the page. We'll have to go back in and look at the formulas to see where that falls into place.
Again, this is unique to our local service area. It takes into consideration population, our climate, the number of different landscape areas, and those are irrigable areas. And then as Dave just mentioned, there are special adjustments. Some of the adjustments available are for seasonal tourism. There is a potable reuse bonus. And then there's an adjustment for water losses. So the residential indoor water use standard, which is probably the thing most of us have heard the most about, because we've had this standard in the state of California looking for a goal of 55 gallons per capita per day for residential customers. And that is an indoor standard. The Monterey Peninsula has met that standard on a regular basis because our actual water use is very close to that, and that includes both indoor and outdoor uses. So starting January 1st of this year, that standard has now dropped, and it is now 47 gallons per capita per day. And it has one more drop in 2040 when it will drop to 42 gallons per capita per day. Then as far as the non-residential or commercial performance measures, the water supplier has to classify all of their users into various different broad categories, which are determined by Energy Star. So Energy Star has a bunch of different categories that actually, unfortunately, don't match perfectly with the water districts, different non-residential factors. But I think that overall, with a lot of the information that the district has, CalAm may be able to use some of our information to help them classify commercial users into these categories. They also have to look at having large landscapes, which are over a half acre, convert to dedicated irrigation meters, or employ in-lieu technologies. That is one thing they have to do. They have to identify those landscapes that meet the threshold in their service area. And that is done primarily by the state did a project where they flew over the state of California, basically, and did a landscape area measurements and supplied that data to each of the water suppliers. So I think CalAm will be actually utilizing that information to look at who these large landscapes are. As part of this also, I had a quick discussion with Dave before the meeting, And back in 1999, the Water District adopted Ordinance number 92, which is no longer in place. But Ordinance 92 required all large landscapes to undergo a water audit and then have a water budget set for them. So we have in the past identified who those large landscape users are. We have actually contacted them and they've had audits done and water budgets set for them. So I think in that regard, we are really a huge step ahead of what the state is required, because we did that 25 years ago. The indoor water demand is not part of the water budget calculation, but again, the state is looking for best management practices, which is the next bullet, and performance measures for commercial users. What I find interesting about this is that the Water Management District and Cal-Am have had these requirements in place for many, many years. And so there's probably not an awful lot that we're going to have to do in addition to what's already been done in these areas, particularly because we've required all of the retrofitting of the non-residential users, and we're requiring best management practices. So I think as far as CII goes, we are very much ahead of the ball on this. And finally, they have to implement these practices for the top water users. Again, we require it for everybody. So I think as far as commercial, non-residential performance measures, we're way ahead.
Yeah, I think the one area of concern that we've only touched the surface of is where they start identifying factors by type of use, which the state has gone and done. They may be, while they very likely will be different than factors we've developed for our uses based on years of data and revisions to the years of data and so forth. So we'll be eyeing that, but this whole exercise, if you will, is needed really for kind of three reasons. One is, if we acquire Cal-Am, it becomes our regulatory issue, so we need to know what's going on. Well, that's obvious. But even without acquiring Cal-Am, we need to keep them honest is the wrong term, but we need to see what they've submitted and make sure that it's accurate. And Stephanie mentioned before the potential for seasonal adjustments to that urban water objective. Well, to the extent that it's like a math equation. It's all this plus this plus this plus this plus this minus that. If in fact there's a potential for a seasonal variation, one of our problems has always been the company knows what accounts are residential, because when they first come in to set a meter, it's like, well, what is this? Oh, it's a home. Okay, you're going to be on the residential side of the ledger. But they don't report population based on the number of residential accounts. They report population based on population surveys / census / city's own population reporting, State Department of Finance, different updates through each census cycle. And so they currently report about 92,000 residents. And so when you're reporting the total residential customer use, and it's an automatic divide by the number of residents, then you're going to get gallons per capita per day. But many of those homeowners or home users are the 2 to 3 months a year homeowners that aren't in our census tract, aren't in the population forecast. And so the denominator is actually bigger, or should be actually bigger, in those summer months when you get a lot of usage in July and August, and travel, car week, all of those things. So that's one thing that we're particularly interested in. The other is the bonus for recycled water. And as we began to look through the various spreadsheets, and And there are many. We're just kind of learning to date, but they filed in January as required. And as we begin to read the data that they filed, some of it's very confusing because 38% or more of the water here comes from recycled users, but it's not delivered by a public water system. It's delivered by a sanitary sewer system, Monterey One Water. And it's not clear that they've properly allocated recycled water to the bonus credits that the reporting is supposed to get. And we will get at that eventually. So the goal for us as a district is to know what's being reported and then to ensure that it's being properly reported so that our local kind of policy goals are met. You don't want to overly punish the community for a known, $3 billion a year hospitality industry that skews the water usage numbers and so forth. So I think our expertise locally is greater than CalAM's expertise. Our willingness to focus on it is greater than CalAM's willingness to focus on it. Their first filing was done by Patrick Pills, who's a San Diego-based kind of general office employee. So they're not necessarily right on top of the local nuances. So it's just one more thing that the district's going to have to learn simultaneously with, frankly, with CalAM learning it.
Okay, Karen, you're on mute.
Sorry, two things about this. One is if we do have questions about CalAM's plan, or we think there may be errors or things that need to be clarified, what's the process for bringing that up? That's one question. The other is more of a comment, which is because there's so much firsthand knowledge or institutional knowledge within the district about these things and all this history of conservation, and I wonder whether the proposal to use I wonder if, I think we should think about, is it more efficient to bring someone in from the outside who's experienced with preparing such plans? Or is it more efficient to figure out a way to do this in-house? Because if it's done in-house, you'll have the people here who are knowledgeable about what's happening on the ground and what's been done in terms of conservation and so on. And you'll need to learn how to put together this particular document. If it's somebody from the outside, they may have done the preparation of the document before, but they won't know anything about our specific, the information about our specific district. They would have to be informed by our staff on all of that. So I just wonder which would be more efficient.
No, it's a great question. And you segued a little bit into the next discussion item, which is the urban water management plan. This one doesn't have a true plan requirement. It's a portal with multiple spreadsheets with multiple cells that have to be filled every January. So
Actually, that's my next slide, Dave.
oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah.
good. Let's keep
I'm
going.
sorry, I confused things by jumping ahead.
It's all right. So the reporting requirements. So the reporting requirements beginning this January and every year thereafter, each water supplier has to calculate its urban water use objective for the next year and demonstrate compliance with the previous year's objective. So this was the first filing, and it will continue every year. And as mentioned previously, the objective is based on this dynamic data, so it will be changing. And then beginning in 2027, each urban water supplier must demonstrate compliance with its objective. So right now we're in that kind of limbo zone. CalAM's 2025 reporting and this is just one table that came out of it, includes the various different water systems. And this is, unfortunately, the Monterey district includes not only the main Cal-Am system, but it also includes Hidden Hills, which is part of the water management district. But it includes also Chular, Garapata, Ralph Lane, Ambler Park, and Toro systems. And so we're lumped all together as far as our reporting goes. I have to say that of those systems, only the main Cal-Am system has fairly good lower water losses than all the little small systems, which tend to have fairly large water losses. And I think that's something we're going to have to look at some point as far as the Hidden Hill system. But this table just shows the type of reporting, total residential water use, indoor and outdoors, the first item on the column on the left. Then it has outdoor irrigation of commercial landscapes associated with dedicated irrigation meters, the system water loss, variances, the provisions, and other things. Cal-Am did not report any of those items on this reporting. So for next year, and Karen, this goes to your question about how do we, what's the process to correct the information? I don't know that we're going to be able to correct it this year, but I think for certain next year before they report, we'll want to make sure that they have all of the information about that. So I think that should be a priority of the district.
And we have in the past, I mean, our goal is to have about 4 people internally know what this whole system of reporting is. And that'd be 2 people upstairs and 2 people downstairs. So 2 people in kind of Stephanie's water demand division, and then either between Maureen and myself, and you may recall that, you know, I've talked about getting a utility analyst or a data jockey, data monkey, you know. This kind of reporting would fall to that person. And then, so you need one, you know, kind of one senior policy person, one numbers person, but we've got to move away from one person knowing about it and then that person retires or moves or whatever, and we forget.
Yeah.
So, in this particular case, an example would be the annual reporting. So you may recall we moved the cease and desist order deadlines when we negotiated jointly with Cal-Am and with other community members. And in 2016, we got it extended to 2021. The annual reports are typically the fourth quarter quarterly reports, but the fourth quarter after a water year becomes the annual report. And so it covers the whole year. And we would look at them. I don't want to say we would check the work, but it popped out. And on a couple occasions, we determined they were counting the Pebble Beach entitlements incorrectly. Another time, we realized they weren't counting what are called carryover credits correctly. And all of these affected how close on paper the company was to violating the cease and desist order. And so it's like, hey guys, I think you may have this number wrong. And so if it was in the interest, let's say, of us, because we were getting too close to a trigger, or we didn't adequately follow the math to give us more breathing room, that's a problem. You know, we don't want to move closer to a violation just because a number is missed, or 2 numbers, or a couple numbers that accumulate over a couple of years. So the pattern was always, I would inform Chris Cook or his predecessor, or Rich Spinlin, and before that, Rob McLean, and now it would be Kevin Tilden, to say, hey, have a look at this. We think there might be a problem. And then it would usually include one of their regulatory attorneys. So we have a pretty good working relationship with staff. Stephanie's known Patrick Pills, their primary conservation programs person statewide, for, I don't know, Steph, 30 years, 25 years,
As long as he's been there.
as long as he's been there.
Yeah.
So it'll be an informal feedback loop until it has to get more formal. But,
Mhm.
you know, we're going to be struggling just to come up to be as smart as maybe Patrick became, since he had several month head start on the reporting of it.
Yeah, and I do have one more slide on this, Dave.
Yep.
Just so on the reporting, that the state's water use efficiency public portal, and Dave, you mentioned that, is kind of, it is the reporting for many things. And so Callan puts in data for various uses. Do we get involved in that at all? I don't know if we do or not.
No.
Okay, anyway, this the reporting pulls together data from other reporting sources and puts it into this massive spreadsheet that that we've had a chance to look at, but not really fully digest, because it's very complex. It has multiple tabs. It has all sorts of filled in data. And as Dave mentioned, oversight is needed just to know what's been reported and to make sure that it was properly reported. And that actually concludes my presentation on this.
Yeah, and Stephanie, if you go back one slide, or Sarah, please. The text on the left-hand side, this is actually kind of interesting, because beginning in 2014, might have been 2013, during that 4-year drought, there began a very significant reporting protocol. And every month, the 405 urban water providers in the state of California would file monthly data. And key among that would be production for residential customers and the population of residential customers. And for years, Cal-Am here was only reporting the Cal-Am main system, Hidden Hills, Ryan Ranch, and Bishop. Perfect for us, because that is our kind of service area. That's the Cal-Am service area we care about. About 2 years ago, they shifted back to include Ambler, Ralph Lane, and Chular, and so forth. Well, these are higher temperature, higher loss distribution systems. And so now that water use per capita has become an important criteria by which the utility is judged, it actually hurts us now to have these numbers that include these little central satellites that are higher in temperature and higher in losses, because now we're going to see kind of a shifting to higher gallons per capita usage. Luckily for us, it's only about 4.5% of all of the usage and all of the revenues in Cal-Am system. So it's not going to have a huge impact, but it was a change in the wrong direction for us. That, you know, we were adding less efficient, higher water use per capita people and making it part of our own.
Okay, you're on mute, Karen.
Sorry, through the chair. The data for each of those subsystems, so it must be available, must be there, right? It could be pulled out of.
Well, it can't, it's not being reported separately. So,
Oh,
Mhm.
oh,
so there's like one field, and it's what is the population for the reporting area. And so
oh,
that 92,000 and change is, well, actually that's the main. There was some breakdown in terms of population for the different sub areas. But again, Karen, that's part of this exercise, which is to figure out, are they over-reporting the denominator affecting the math or not? And so as we learn what's actually being reported, we'll have a better grip on it. But as I mentioned, the previous reporting system went from just the 3 areas, and then it dropped Bishop and Ryan Ranch once we allowed them to be connected to the main distribution system. So now the
Okay.
two that we care about are the Monterey, Maine, and the Hidden Hills.
Mhm.
And they absolutely changed the reporting in the prior portal. But you may be right that this portal has them disaggregated, but it wasn't the
Okay.
case in what they most recently have been reporting for 2 years. So
I have a suggestion, Director Paul, if I may, through the chair.
Ahead.
We have their 2025 general rate case coming up. It has to be filed July the 1st, and we do data requests. And so, Steph, I think it's possible you could even start developing them now, because I guarantee that Patrick Pills in his work papers received the pumping from every one of those separate entities. And if we should be able to get access to all of them that were incorporated into the figures that he produced.
We do, so the reporting does have that. It breaks it down by system.
Oh,
Yeah, so we do have the production numbers, or the whatever.
For each separate,
For each of those separate systems.
okay,
and then
because he's
combined.
doing it by central district, isn't he?
It's Monterey district.
now, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you have to be careful. The Monterey service area is what Dave was talking about.
Right,
which
but
is
they call it the Monterey, it's literally in this portal as the Monterey district.
Yeah, even though
Um,
it's,
So, but yeah, so they do have the actual production, which is the water losses. I mean, that's where I know about water loss. But I don't see the separation of the population and that kind of thing in here.
And so we can look in a cell, and if it's a calculation, we can follow the formulas and figure out what's in there. And so right now we're still, as I said, we're still learning. Do they aggregate up all the population and just divide by that one number, which seems to be the case?
Yeah, I think that is, yeah.
Which will not work in the
Well,
peninsula.
the good news is right now for
Yeah.
this reporting, we're like 3,000 acre feet below what the objective was. So
Yeah.
it's good.
that's good.
Yeah.
Still, I think that data, we may need that to use that data at some point.
Yeah.
Mayor, do you have any questions?
So thank you for the suggestion, Fran, for a data request. Good idea.
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, Dave, over these last two items, do you think we need to go ahead and start planning to hire that person that you were talking about to start doing these reports and looking at them?
No, not yet. We
Okay.
got to get smarter on this and find out what we think it's really going to require of us. But we've committed to making that effort. So.
Okay. So is this going to the full board for discussion or anything, or just giving us a warning?
Just committee. This is
Committee? Okay, that question, the district needs the oversight. And I think we're coming into play with that. That's why I asked you about that person, so we can do what we need to do and let Cal-Am know we're gonna do what we need to do. So, and make sure these numbers are right. You know, I got a problem with district oversight and it's not being used. So I'll talk to you later on that one. But okay. Let's take that one to the public, see if we have any public comment on this item.
Chair Edwards, I see no raised hands.
Okay. Dave, what's the next item?
So the next item, let me just quickly check to see if Maureen made it back. No. So we started up ASR late yesterday. So everyone who can is out there working on ASR today. So I'll take this one. We became a wholesaler the instant we sold 1 drop of pure water Monterey water. We were kind of tantamount to being a wholesaler when we started the ASR program. But that was kind of a weird relationship in that We would treat the water, we would inject the water, take the water out, treat the water, but there was never any consideration given. No money was changing hands, so we didn't buy the raw water from Cal-Am, nor did they buy the stored water from us. And still to this day, there's no financial transaction for the water. So it's not a wholesale arrangement because we're not selling ASR water into the Cal-Am system. We're just delivering it. But the Pure Water Monterey project is a true wholesale condition. So that puts us in a new category. Wholesalers are required every 5 years to file an urban water management plan. The plan has very specific sections, one of which is an appendix, which is a water shortage contingency plan. So it's a little deeper dive into what happens if you go into drought. But there's typically a section like in a normal retailer urban water management plan, they will do a supply and demand forecast. Wholesalers are not expected to do the demand forecast component. Now, as Fran could tell you and any others who've watched our Public Utilities Commission proceedings, we've watched the supply and demand forecast like a hawk for the same reasons we talked about under the prior item, which is we need to see what Cal-Am's reporting. And the last urban water management plan filed by Cal-Am, you know, we took huge issues with over the double and triple counting of certain components of demand. Well, that's not really our purview as a wholesaler, but we still need to prepare an overall urban water management plan. And so just as a quick glimpse, I'm going to share my screen. And this spreadsheet right here are wholesalers who file plans. And this goes to Director Paul's point. A number of them use consultants, but you see the word self here for Callegas, that's Ventura County, Kern County, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District. So there are some large-scale wholesalers who do it themselves. Santa Clara Valley Water District, and I think that's kind of it. So I could see that we would get to a point where we would do this by ourselves, but I think the first time out, just getting the format, the requirements met, and so forth, that's pointing to getting a third-party consultant in. And then we provide them all the local knowledge that we have. And then hopefully the document gets thoroughly vetted by our people so it says the right thing. I remember the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan at Cal-Am made a very clear statement that fire flow demands were 400 acre-feet per year. And they said this is an important correction from the previous one, which had fire flow closer to 4 acre-feet per year. So a 100-fold increase. And through the discovery process, the data request process, we actually asked for the data behind the fire flow demand, and then we got the answer. Oh, upon further review of our data, there was a mistake made in the urban water management plan, and fire flows are actually closer to 4 acre-feet per year, not 400 acre-feet per year. Well, on a 9,400 acre-foot per year overall system, being off by 400 is significant. So this was another case where this is why we like to look at the submittals of, you know, Cal-Am. It's not just to single them out. It's anybody who's providing water service here, we would do the same, but that's what we do. So we would expect whatever we file will get the same level of scrutiny. You know, what are we saying versus what is Cal-Am saying versus others. We've highlighted some of the consultants, not all of the consultants, and there's a reason for that. We were trying to figure out who has done work for the investor-owned utilities on a consistent basis so we could choose someone different, or who has worked for agencies that we're really comfortable with or that we know really well. They might be a plus for us. So we're still trying to figure out who that list might be, but Director Paul, our recommendation to the board will be first time ever hire a consultant, then look at doing it ourselves after that.
Got it.
So when are we gonna hire this consultant? And within the next six months or after mid-year review, or
Yeah, it'll
how soon
be
we gonna get them in?
it'll be for the next budget year because the requirement date for filing is July 1 of 2026. And it's supposed to reflect the I guess it's the calendar year. No, I think it's the fiscal year 2024-25. So you have a full year to produce it. And so if we get somebody on board right around the beginning of the next fiscal year, so it's budgeted in the next budget, not in the mid-year budget this year. So we'll be coming, probably come here in June with a proposal. I know Maureen has put in my inbox a draft request for proposals. So it's in the works.
Okay. Karen, you got any more questions on this item?
No, I just hope that the problem of conflicted consultants is a surmountable one.
Okay, Mayor, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Since there's no questions, we'll close this item. Oh, let's take it out to the public and find out if we got any public comment.
Chair Edwards, I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Jim, what's the next item?
That is it. I'm going to unshare so we can all look at our smiling faces and adjourn the meeting.
Okay. So, for future agendas,
Right.
hey, can we get reports on our amnesty program?
Mm,
Put that for a regular, we got what, 5 more meetings, and I like to be kept up to date, and the committee like to be kept up to date, and the full board on how we doing on that effort. And and each board meeting, I don't mind if y'all bring it up to warn the public, because after the amnesty, you're going to be taking action. So I don't want people out there saying, well, I didn't know, or I didn't hear you say it. So I can say that I said it about 12 times, once a month, twice a month. So
Yeah, I wanted to check. I thought it was included in our conservation report. So
I just like to be, I think the public, keep us informed as much as possible. Anything to add to the agenda, Karen and Mayor? Anything else y'all want for our next meeting?
I think Stephanie wants to
yeah,
say
Chair,
something.
I do want to, in the monthly conservation report in the board packet, under water demand management, we have added a close the open permits project report. Every month you're going to see this. It has been there.
We should have reported that out.
Yeah, well, I think I said that we were going to do that on our last water demand committee when it came up, but so just as an example, this was for the month of January. We sent out 210 letters during this was during December. Sent out 210 letters during December. 111 properties were inspected to close the open permits, and 84 of those 111 inspections passed and 27 failed. In December, 1 permit was amended using the district reserve allocation.
I like that report.
Excellent.
hey,
Thank you.
Hey, bring it out publicly at our next board meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
Dave,
just
he can
thinking about
mention
that. I probably should have highlighted it during the GM report and just directed
Right, well,
your attention to it.
Yeah,
that's
that's
one of the
good.
important, so.
Good.
Mayor, you got anything you want for a future agenda item or anything?
No, thank you.
All right,
I do want you to know we'll bring this urban water management plan, exact same item, to the Water Supply Planning Committee next month. Because this is one of those that straddles both committees, so.
okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, our next meeting is April the 10th, 2025. So I hope we have one. Yeah. So
Thank you. Thank you.
nothing
everyone.
further, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.